Hello everyone. In today's video you will learn the shocking story of Ethan Keller, a famous pastor in the United States who died during his baptism service and had a devastating encounter with Jesus. What he heard from the other side will shake his faith. "You used my word as a mask," was the sentence that changed everything. This almost indescribable experience will open your eyes to what really matters in your walk with God. So leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss any content like this. And comment below which city you are watching, because I want to know how far this message is reaching. Now take a deep breath and get ready, because this story will turn your soul inside out. My name is Ethan Keller. I'm 47 years old. Pastor for more than 2 decades, leader of one of the fastest growing churches in the southern United States. I've preached to crowds, participated in international conferences, broken audience records on live broadcasts. My face appeared on billboards. My name was synonymous with spiritual relevance. But that Sunday, that damned Holy Sunday, I discovered that it was all just veneer. Beautiful on the outside, rotten on the inside. It was a special cult, the celebration of our Sunday of revival and baptisms. The church was packed, cameras at all angles. We were live to more than 180,000 people, the largest number of simultaneous viewers in the history of our ministry. The leaders were excited. I was nervous, not out of spiritual fear, but because I wanted everything to be perfect. The sound, the light, the framing. My white suit lined up, a well-groomed beard, the microphone discreetly attached to the lapel. The stage was mine. Again. During the praise, I raised my hands fervently and thought about how many reels those takes would make. When I started preaching, people were crying. Some knelt, but inside me an abyss began to open. I felt discomfort, as if God was silent, not absent, only watching. And then the moment of baptism arrived. I went down with the first young man to the tank. A girl behind me was crying profusely. When I dipped it into the water, I heard applause. And at that moment, I was invaded by an icy, brutal, cruel thought. This applause is mine. Yes, I liked it. I fed on them. And I didn't regret it. But what happened next, I will never forget. When I picked up the next person being baptized, I felt dizzy. I leaned on the edge of the tank, trying to hide it. The world spun. My ears started ringing. I saw flashes of light. I tried to step out of the water, but my body didn't respond. Arms tingled. My chest felt like it was burning from the inside. The last thing I heard was my own voice, distorted, echoing from the microphone attached to my soaked jacket. "Jesus, help me." I fell into the tank. People screamed. The workers ran. The camera shook. The transmission was cut off. But for me, there were no more cameras. The light went out in the world, and the sky lit up above me. And that's where it all started. There was no more sound. There was no more body, just a void, loaded with something inexplicable. It was as if I were in a corridor between worlds, neither alive nor dead, but stripped of everything that gave me security. The weight of wet clothes disappeared. The sound of screams was swallowed by absolute silence. And there, without understanding how, you knew. My heart had stopped, but consciousness was alive, more alive than ever. I saw myself from above. The tank, the confusion, the brothers trying to pull me out of the water, the desperation in my wife's eyes in the front row. The young man I almost baptized, paralyzed, not understanding what had just happened, and there, watching my body being pulled out of the tank like a deactivated doll. A feeling came over me. "Ethan, now you will see who you really are." That voice didn't come from outside. She sprouted inside me. But it was as if heaven itself had spoken. And I felt it. I felt an ancestral shame, a pain without a wound, a total exposure. Because at that moment, everything I hid behind the Bible, eloquence, charisma, was not before eternity. Suddenly, the surrounding scene began to fade away. The temple disappeared, the walls evaporated like smoke, and something new appeared in its place. A space, without a ceiling, without a floor, no time. I was suspended as if floating within a thought of God. And then, the light, he appeared. But it wasn't just any light. It was alive, pulsating, filled with something that hurt and healed me at the same time. It grew towards me, and the closer it got, the more I wanted to run away. Because there was no pretext there was no supporting verse. It only existed raw truth. The light opened like a portal, and from the center of it, a presence emerged. It was more than a silhouette, was authority in form of being, and when he spoke, I shuddered. Ethan Keller. Just that. My name. But said with a weight that I have never heard in any preaching. There was no anger. There was no accusation. But there was a shattering clarity. Just the way he said my name made me understand. Jesus knew everything. Not Ethan from the cameras, not the pastor of the services. But Ethan, like me, didn't like to look in the mirror. I tried to justify myself. I thought about saying, Lord, thousands were saved through me. But before any words came out, he answered my thought. You used my word as a mask. You covered your vanity with verses. You exalted yourself in my name. It went through me like a spear of glory, a pain that did not come from the flesh, but from the Spirit. And I knew the trial had not begun. It was already at an end. In his presence, there is no argument that survives. I was there before the source of all truth. Jesus. He wasn't angry. There was no screaming, but it was impossible not to feel the weight of his holiness crushing everything that was false in me. It wasn't a light that just illuminated. It was a light that revealed. And as he stared at me, something began to happen. My entire past began to blur. Project around me like holographic scenes alive, too real to bear. I saw my first sermons, still with genuine passion. But then the images changed. I saw it the first time I felt more important than the message. The first time I changed a text to get applause. The first time I was applauded and I thought, this belongs to me. I saw a service where a young man went up to the altar asking for liberation. I laid hands, spoke in tongues, and he fell to the ground. People screamed, applauded, but deep down I knew that day that what touched that boy, it wasn't heaven. It was my performance. Jesus showed me faces, looks that faded after hearing my harsh, arrogant words, people who came thirsty and left with wounds, young people who sought direction and received weight, not grace. And then, he showed the scariest thing. My own home. I saw my wife praying, alone in silence while I edited videos of my sermons. I saw my children slowly moving away from the church with empty eyes saying, my father's God seems cruel. I was shaking, because I knew every verse. I had a doctorate in theology, but there, I was illiterate from heaven. Jesus didn't need to say anything. His gaze alone was a mirror that revealed who I had become. A man who used the word to build an empire and called it ministry. And then he spoke, without moving your lips. You talked about me, but you didn't talk with me. That sentence tore me apart, because it was the purest truth. How many times have I studied the Bible looking for ammunition to win debates? How many times have I prepared sermons with technique and zero prayer? How many times have I used the anointing as a decoration? Jesus looked at me, and I was a soul undressed, embarrassed, devastated, and yet, he was still there. There was no contempt in his gaze. There was sadness, like someone who sees someone who could have done much more if they hadn't fallen in love with their own reflection. And then he whispered, you didn't know. but you were preaching to yourself. And in that moment, something inside me died. But it wasn't the body, was the false me. Jesus' words echoed not as sound, but as fire, silent, but unbearably clear. His every sentence didn't just hit me in the ears, it went through my soul. And then, he said something that sealed my fall. Ethan, you preached truths, but in a spirit that I never authorized. That hurt more than any whip, more than the pain of a heart attack, more than the terror of death, because heresy wasn't my problem. It was not a sexual sin nor a doctrinal lie. It was something more subtle, more diabolical. It was that intention behind the truth. As Jesus spoke, scenes continued to open. I saw excerpts from sermons in which I denounced sin. But I did it with pleasure, like someone throwing stones from the top of a pedestal. I saw comments that I responded to on social media, not with grace, but with sarcasm, using the Bible as a sword, not to liberate, but to humiliate. And then I saw a small, rural Texas church, a simple community, which one day I publicly criticized for lack of doctrine. Jesus showed me the heart of the pastor of that church. I saw the man crying, praying on the floor, fasting for weeks for revival. And I heard the voice of the Lord saying to me, "He knew me more than you did." It broke me. I, the great, the influential, the anointed, was being compared to someone who didn't even have a microphone, but who spoke directly to the Father's heart. Then Jesus approached, and without anger, but with a seriousness that made the entire universe tremble, he said, "You sought to be applauded when you should have sought to be broken." I tried to respond, but there were no words. Everything I knew how to say on earth, all my oratory, my rhetoric, my theological arguments, they died before that voice. And then he showed me something else, something that was not a place, but an eternal feeling. The emptiness of those who use the truth as a stage and not as a bridge. And this place, it wasn't heaven. That's when Jesus looked inside me, not as someone examining, but as someone reveals what was always there, and spoke with a voice of eternity. "You sought too much glory to still fit into mine." And I cried, but tears don't clean when there is no true repentance. And I realized my soul was facing the greatest risk that a servant of God can face. To be applauded by men and rejected by heaven. If there's one moment I'll never forget, it's this one. Jesus stopped speaking, and what came next was not a new vision nor a new phrase. It was a sound, the sound of souls. I heard muffled cries, screams of confusion, prayers that never reached heaven. It was like being in the center of an invisible crowd, thousands of voices, some distant, others painfully close, and each one of them was there for my cause. Jesus didn't need to say anything. You knew. They were people I hurt, not with weapons, not with scandals, but with words spoken in the wrong tone, with truths released without love, with theology without compassion. I felt the weight of each one. A young woman named Rachel came to mind. She came to my church for the first time at a youth service. She wore short clothes and heavy makeup. I saw her from the altar, and in the middle of the sermon I made a public hint, mocking the spirit of Jezebel. She never came back. Now in that dimension I heard her crying, not as an echo of the past, but as a present cry. Jesus just told me. She didn't resist. You pushed her back into the abyss. Then I saw a man, Jason, a former member of the church, shy, fragile, tried to confess a struggle with pornography. I held him up in the pulpit as an example of discipline and holiness. He fell into depression. He walked away. And there I saw his eyes, erasing, like a flame suffocated by the wind. Hell wasn't what I saw, era consequence. And with each face that appeared, my heart bled. Because while I used the Bible to build reputation, real people got lost. People who trusted me. People who needed Jesus and found only Ethan Keller on the way. Jesus then asked me, in a serene but heartbreaking tone, "Do you remember how many times you cried for souls?" Because I remember. How many you ignored. There was no running from that courtroom. Heaven was not an audience. It was an absolute mirror. There, I realized, the truth without love weighs like condemnation. And even the most orthodox preaching can push souls into the abyss if it is led by vanity masked as zeal. And then, the last voice I heard at that moment, it wasn't Jesus. It was a girl, a whisper, almost inaudible. Mom said that pastor shouted so much that God must be angry. She was the daughter of a woman who had left the church because of my rigidity, and that killed me, more than physical death. After hearing those voices, I thought there was nothing left to see, but heaven wasn't done with me yet. The surrounding light expanded, and everything began to change once again. It was like being transported to within the very heart of God, a place where every thought was light, every emotion was sound, and every truth had form. Before me appeared what I can only call sanctuary of truth. It wasn't made of walls or columns. It was like a living chamber, where everything that was real vibrated. There was no space for masks there. And it was in this place that Jesus spoke again, but now, with a different tone, one weight of mercy, filled with pain and love at the same time. "You never really knew me, Ethan, but I always knew you." He extended his hand. And when he touched my shoulder, scenes appeared around us, but now, not of condemnation. They were scenes that showed me everything that could have been. I saw it myself, kneeling one morning, praying with a sincere heart. I saw the church I could have pastored with humility. I saw young people being freed, not by speeches, but by presence. I saw my wife, smiling like she hadn't done in years. It was my life if I had chosen to be a servant, not a star. And then Jesus said something I will never forget. "You sought to be a reference. I called you to be a reflection." That sentence destroyed the last bit of pride within me. I started to cry. But it wasn't an emotional cry, it was existential. I sobbed at the truth, because for the first time in decades of ministry, I was being pastored for him. And that's when the impossible happened. Jesus looked at me and offered me an invitation, not with words, but with the look that reconstructs. He showed me a choice. I saw two realities before me. One where my soul would be taken and the sentence sealed, and another where I would return, not for the stage, but to the cross, not to preach like before, but for live what I never really lived. I asked, trembling, with a torn heart, "Is there still time?" And he replied, "For the repentant there is always a fresh start." At that instant the surrounding light began to tremble. A deep sound like 1,000 hearts beating at the same time enveloped me, and before I knew it, I was being pulled back. But not like before. Not like Ethan Keller, the famous pastor, but how a man stripped of himself. It wasn't smooth. It wasn't poetic. It was brutal, as if I had been hurled back into the world of the living by a divine gale. Suddenly, the weight of the body crushed me. His chest burned. The air burned like fire entering the lungs for the first time. I heard whistles, voices, machines. The hospital lights flickered like strobes from a show where I was no longer the main artist. The first sensation was pain. But the second was strangeness. I felt out of place, as if that body wasn't mine anymore, as if the bones, the muscles, the skin were borrowed clothes that no longer fit. My soul had touched something so pure, so definitive, that returning to this world, it felt like punishment. I was in an ICU surrounded by doctors. Someone said, "He's back. We have a heartbeat." Another lower voice whispered, How is it possible? He had been standing still for more than 5 minutes. My wife ran into the room. His face was bathed in tears, a mixture of relief and despair. She held my hand and said, "Did you hear me, Ethan? You're back. Thank God you're back." But I couldn't answer, because inside me something screamed, "Go back to what, if everything I was died in that tank?" For the next few days I was silent. Doctors came and called me a miracle. Nurses commented, "You survived a massive heart attack during a live broadcast. It's a sign, Pastor." But little did they know, the real heart attack was in the soul. Inside I reviewed everything, every sentence of Jesus, every face I saw, every tear I heard, and the only question that consumed me was, how to live now after being stripped naked by the truth. My mouth, which once preached eloquently to you, was silent. My hands, which gestured with authority, trembled. And the pulpit, just thinking about him, I felt nausea. Because now I knew. Stepping onto an altar without being in communion with, Khatan is walking on hot coals with straw feet. My wife asked me on the third day, "Did you see something, Ethan?" And I just shook my head, but inside I screamed, I saw everything. I saw heaven. I saw Jesus. I saw who I really was. But it wasn't time to talk yet. First, I needed to get rid of the man the world applauded, to become the man heaven would forgive. The body's healing came quickly. But the soul, that one hurt in silence day after day. Back home, surrounded by care, prayers, messages of support, flowers and cards saying, "Welcome back, warrior of the Lord." I just wanted to disappear. It wasn't honor that I felt. It was shame. A deep shame which cannot be washed away with a shower or with nice words. I spent hours staring at my Bible, not like before, as a sermon-building tool, but like someone trying to stare into a shattered mirror, seeing their own reflection in pieces. I couldn't open my mouth to pray, because now I knew what it means to cry out to a God who sees beyond words. I spent days without leaving my room. The pulpit sent me messages. The media team said the numbers had exploded with the accident. Millions of views, prayers around the world. But little did they know that what it really exploded, he was my conscience. I received invitations for interviews. They asked me to share the testimony of the miracle. But how can we explain that the real miracle was not survival? Was it the destruction of old Ethan? I started writing, alone, in an old notebook hidden in a drawer. I wrote everything, every sentence of Jesus, every voice I heard, every face I saw. And the more I wrote, the more I realized I was being reconstructed. Not the image, not the name, but the essence. I stopped watching my own videos. I deleted photos from events where I was the center. I blocked invitations. I refused honors. And for the first time in years, I knelt without a camera, without an audience, without a post. It was just me and God. And even without hearing his voice in that room, I knew he was there. Because now, finally, I really was. My wife came in one night and found me crying silently. "Did you dream again?" she asked. I just shook my head. She sat next to me, held my hand, and said something that took me apart. "Whoever this Ethan is that is being born, I prefer him to the shepherd from before." That's when I realized heaven didn't want my reputation. I wanted my repentance. And maybe, just maybe, there was still a chance, not to return to the spotlight, but to be truly useful for the kingdom. It took a while, but it arrived. The day I would stand on a pulpit again. The ministry scheduled a special gratitude service for my miraculous recovery. They expected a celebration. They expected a show of faith. They expected the usual Ethan, firm, eloquent, charismatic. But that man died in the tank. The church was packed. Old members, visitors, curious people, pastors from other cities. The cameras were ready, lights positioned. Even the hashtag for the broadcast was already prepared. Volta do Leão. But what no one expected, it was that the lion had been tamed. I went up slowly. No suit, no lavalier microphone, no notes or tablet. Just a worn-out Bible in my hands and a notebook, the one where I wrote down everything I experienced. The silence was palpable. Everyone was waiting for a testimony about physical deliverance, but I didn't come to talk with a stopped heart. I came to talk about the soul unmasked. I took a deep breath and started. I should be dead. The first rows smiled, like someone hearing a miracle. But I continued. And maybe the Ethan you knew really is. I looked at those people. Faces that admired me, that applauded me for years, and with a trembling voice I confessed everything. I spoke about the experience. I spoke about the encounter with Jesus. I spoke of the sentence, "You used my word as a mask." I spoke of the voices I heard, of the faces I hurt, of the entire life I spent preaching a gospel that didn't live. Some started to cry, others lowered their heads. I saw pastor friends looking at each other confused. But at that moment, I no longer needed to be understood. I just needed to be true. I came to ask for forgiveness, I said, to God, to my wife, to my children, to you. Because I turned the pulpit into a stage, the ministry into a showcase, the truth into a spectacle. He said he didn't know if he would preach again. But if he preached, let it be from the heart scratched and not with memorized phrases. In the last row, I saw a young man in a cap lowering his face. I later learned that it was a young man who had left the church years before because of my rigidity. He came back that day, not because of a preaching, but because of a breaks. The service ended without music, no applause, only with people kneeling, including me, because on that altar, there was no more performer, just a repentant sinner. Today I am no longer the same, not because I survived a heart attack, but why I died spiritually and was resurrected with the truth. I no longer use the same pulpits. I declined invitations. I canceled schedules. I deleted videos that only promoted me. I went back to what should have been the beginning of it all, the floor, the place where the word is lived before being spoken. I spent weeks rebuilding my relationship with God, my family, and even the Bible itself. She is no longer my work material. It's my medicine. I reconciled with brothers I hurt. I looked for forgotten names to ask for forgiveness, and I started visiting small churches, the kind where the sound fails, but not the presence of God. And one day, alone before God, I asked Yuan, "Lord, why did you let me go back?" And the answer came, simple and fierce. Because many are applauding you, while they are one step away from the abyss, and someone needs to warn you. This is my new mission. It's no longer about moving audiences and alert consciences. Today, when I preach, my voice shakes. Not out of fear of the people, but from respect for heaven. Because I know what awaits me if I ever use Jesus' name again to lift up my own. And if you've made it this far, I need to tell you something. Beware of preaching that massages the ego. Be careful with the gospel that talks about the cross, but doesn't make anyone bleed. Be careful with applause. They can bury your soul. Jesus said to me, "You used my word as a mask." And I'm here, alive, not to justify myself, but for prevent you from making the same mistake. Don't expect a collapse, a heart attack, clinical death. Repent now, because the judgment, it has already begun in the house of God. And if you still have time, it's because God still wants to transform you. But understand this once and for all. Not every Lord, Lord will be heard on the last day. If you like this beautiful spiritual testimony, leave a like, comment on your impressions, subscribe to the channel, And don't forget to activate the notification bell to watch each new video and help us spread this message to a greater number of people. Until next time.